On June 18, 2023, five people climbed into a small experimental submersible called Titan. They were headed nearly 4,000 meters beneath the Atlantic Ocean to visit the wreck of the Titanic. But Titan never made it back. The submersible imploded, killing everyone aboard, including its CEO, Stockton Rush. At first, the story looks like a bizarre technological disaster, but the deeper investigation, more complicated than the longer the story went on. Because this wasn't simply a story about a submarine that failed, it was a story about a business. A business built around selling wealthy customers a chance to do something almost nobody else could do: visit the Titanic. And behind that business was Stockton Rush, an engineer, entrepreneur, pilot, and self described innovator who loved the deep sea exploration industry. But his approach to innovation came with one major problem. Again and again, people warned him about the risk, and again he pushed forward. His arrogance ultimately became who Stockton Rush was. He had a background in aerospace engineering and business, and had experience as a pilot. In 2009, Rush co-founded OceanGate. The original idea wasn't simple to take tourists to the Titanic. OceanGate envisioned a commercial business built around privately operated submersibles. The company wanted to make a deep sea exploration more accessible. And that was actually a potentially enormous business opportunity. Traditional deep sea research is incredibly expensive, but what if private customers could pay for this experience? Instead of relying entirely on government for research, OceanGate could sell expedition to wealthy individuals, researchers, and adventurers, and one destination stood above others: the Titanic. The wreck sits roughly about 3,800 meters beneath the surface of the North Atlantic. For most people, it's completely inaccessible, but OceanGate saw the inaccessibility as a business opportunity. OceanGate eventually began offering seats on expeditions to the Titanic, and these weren't cheap vacations. Customers were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for the opportunity. The business model was simple: build a submersible, transport it to the Titanic, take paying customers underwater, and repeat. But there was a fundamental problem. Getting to the Titanic isn't like a commercial plane. At the depth, the pressure was enormous. The deeper the sub goes, the greater the pressure surrounding the hull. A failure isn't like a car breaking down. There isn't necessarily an opportunity to pull over. If the pressure hull fails, the surrounding water can crush the vessel almost instantaneously. The entire business depended on one thing: the Titan had to survive. And this is where Stockton Rush's philosophy became extremely important. Rush wanted to do things differently. Traditional deep-sea submersible commonly use materials such as titanium or specially engineered steels. OceanGate chose to use something much more controversial for Titan. They chose carbon fiber. You know, the same thing they make Lamborghinis with? The argument wasn't that carbon fiber couldn't potentially make the submersible lighter and less expensive while still providing the necessary strength, but deep sea pressure creates a very different engineering environment from the one carbon fiber is commonly associated with. Experts began to question whether Titan's unconventional design had been sufficiently tested. It wasn't just internet criticism. In 2018, OceanGate's own former director of marine operations, David Lockridge, raised serious concerns about the Titan. According to court documents, Lockridge argued that the vessel needed more testing and that important components had not been adequately evaluated. He also raised concerns about the hull and viewport. Lockridge was subsequently fired. Yeah, I thought companies usually protect whistleblowers. Anyway, OceanGate disputed his characterization of the company's engineering and safety practices, and the legal dispute was eventually settled. The controversy didn't end there. In 2018, a group of deep-sea industry professionals also expressed serious concerns about OceanGate's approach to Titan. The concern wasn't simply that OceanGate was experimenting. The concern was that OceanGate intended to take an experimental vehicle into one of the most dangerous environments on Earth, with paying customers abroad. Industry experts urge Rush to have Titan independently certified. This process is commonly referred to as classification or classing. Independent classification can involve extensive evaluation of the vessel's design, construction materials, testing, and system. However, Rush resisted. He believed traditional industry standards could hold back innovation, and this became one of the defining controversies surrounding OceanGate. Was Rush an innovator challenging outdated assumptions, or was he ignoring standards that existed because people had already learned, often through tragedy, what happened when those standards are ignored? Perhaps nothing illustrates Rush's philosophy better than comments he made in interviews. In 2022, Rush told CBS correspondent David Porge, at some point, safety is just pure waste. He continued by essentially arguing that if people wanted absolute safety, they would never do anything risky. Rush wasn't saying safety didn't matter. His argument was that excessive safety requirements could prevent innovation, and this philosophy was central to OceanGate's business model. So instead of any safety, he opted for no safety. What a guy. The company wasn't trying to build another conventional submarine, it was trying to disrupt deep sea exploration. Rush even described having broken some rules while building Titan, arguing that he had done so because he believed his engineering decisions was logical. That philosophy might work in some industries, but deep sea exploration has a brutal characteristic. Physics doesn't care how innovative you are. And now we get to the strangest part of the business. Passengers knew Titan was experimental. Before entering the submersible, they signed extensive liability waivers. Passengers were informed that the Titan was an experimental vessel and that the expedition could result in serious injury or death. Former passengers described the word death appearing multiple times in the waiver. This raises an important question. If customers knowingly signed a waiver saying they understood the risk, how much responsibility does the company still have? A waiver isn't a magic document that makes engineering problems disappear. It can communicate risk and potentially affect legal liability, but it does not change the physical reality of the vehicle. And this distinction became particularly important because OceanGate was selling the experiments commercially. They weren't simply engineering testing a prototype in a laboratory, people were paying enormous amount of money to climb inside. OceanGate also referred to its paying customers as mission specialists rather than simply tourists. The terminology became controversial. Critics argued that the language made commercial passengers sound more like members of a scientific expedition. But there was a practical reason for this distinction. The legal and regulatory framework surrounding submersibles and passenger vehicles is complicated, particularly when operations occur in international waters. OceanGate argued that these operations did not fall under the U.S. passenger vessel requirement because of how the expeditions were structured. Critics saw this as exploiting regulatory gaps. The broader issue was clear. OceanGate was operating in a gray area. It was selling something that looked like tourism while pretending itself as an experimental exploration company. OceanGate's business model had another controversy. A Florida couple, Mark and Sharon Hale, paid $210,000 for a planned Titanic expedition. According to the lawsuit, the expedition was reportedly delayed or cancelled, and they sought a refund. The couple sued Rush and OceanGate in 2023, and after the Titan disaster, they dropped the lawsuit out of respect for the people who had died. The lawsuit never reached a final determination on the allegation, but it provides another look at the business behind OceanGate. The company wasn't simply selling technology, it was selling extremely expensive experiences to customers, and when those experiences didn't happen, disputes could follow. There's another part of Stockton Rush business vision that is often overlooked. OceanGate wasn't supposed to be just a company that took people to the Titanic. Rush had much bigger ambitions. The long term vision involved creating a new commercial market for submersibles, research, underwater infrastructure, exploration, tourism, potentially even permanent underwater habitats. In other words, Titan was supposed to be a demonstration of what OceanGate could really build. If OceanGate could provide the private customers safe travel thousands of meters underwater, the company could potentially expand into an entirely new industry. That makes the Titan disaster even more significant. The problem wasn't just one failed expedition, it potentially destroyed the entire business model. And by this point, they were warning signs. Former employees raised concern, outside experts raised concern, industry professionals raised concern. There were also incidents involving Titan and earlier OceanGate expeditions. According to testimony later presented to the US Coast Guard, Titan had experienced unusual events during previous dives. There were some concerns about the hull, there were concerns about testing, there were concerns about the company's engineering practices, and there were concerns about Rush's management style. One of the most important allegations came from David Lockridge. He claimed that when he raised safety concerns, OceanGate responded with hostility and eventually terminated him. OceanGate disputes his allegations, but years later, the same concerns became central to an investigation into the Titan disaster. Titan actually reached the Titanic wreck before the fatal expedition. In 2021, OceanGate began Titanic expeditions, and in 2022, Titan returned to the wreck. Every successful dive provided OceanGate with something extremely valuable: proof of concept. The company could tell potential customers, "We've done this before." But according to the US Coast Guard, later investigations in 2022 expeditions also generated data indicating problem with Titan's hull. The Coast Guard concluded that OceanGate failed to properly investigate and address known hull abnormalities. Then came June 18, 2023. Titan began its descent towards the Titanic. Inside were 5 people: Stockton Rush, British businessman Hamish Hardin, Pakistan businessman Shahzad Dawood, his son, a French explorer Paul Henry. First, the expedition appeared normal, but communication with Titan eventually was lost. A massive international search began. 4 days later, for days the world waited. Was Titan still alive? Had it become disabled? Could the crew be rescued? The answer came. A remotely operated vehicle discovered debris on the seafloor near the Titanic. Titan had suffered a catastrophic implosion. All 5 people aboard were dead. One of the most important questions surrounding OceanGate is whether cost played a role. Deep sea engineering is expensive. Testing is expensive. Independent certification is expensive. The Coast Guard investigation found that OceanGate maintenance and operational decision contributed to the deterioration of the Titan. Stockton Rush wanted to change the way humans explore the ocean. Instead, he became the center of one of the most controversial engineering disasters of modern era. 5 people died, a company collapsed, and a multi-year investigation concluded that the disasters could have been prevented. The most disturbing part isn't that Titan was experimental. It's that people had been warning OceanGate about the problems before the final dive. The tragedy wasn't simply that the submarine failed, it was that there was an opportunity to stop the failure from happening. And that may have been the most important lesson from the OceanGate story. In business, ignoring a warning doesn't make the risk disappear. Sometimes it just means the bill hasn't arrived as yet.